final two races of the 2020 SACCS took place over a single weekend in the Free State town of Parys. First up was the Ford Parys 400, round 4 of the championship. Welcome to the Free State, where there was plenty of adrenaline and action. Proudly brought to you by Toyota Gazoo Racing, Ford, Total Quartz and Pirelli. Welcome to Parys, and more precisely the Parys Airfield, which served as the DSP and race HQ for the Ford Parys 400, the penultimate round of the topsy-turvy, COVID-delayed 2020 season of the South African Premier Cross Country Racing Series, the SACCS. Run with COVID protocols in place, the race took place without spectators once again, and access to the DSP was restricted. Even so, there was a festive atmosphere and a sense of excitement in the air, and no wonder, since not one of the championships had been decided yet, and there was still a lot to play for here in Parys. Here's how things stacked up after the first 3 rounds of the 2020 season. In Class FIA, it was Toyota's Henk Latergan ahead of Janiel de Villiers, with Brian Baragwanath now up to 3rd after his 2nd place finish at the Total Agri 400. Class T saw the Horns move back into the lead with just 2 points between them and Terence Marsh, whilst Force Prinsloo passed Gary Berthold for 3rd on the log. In the special vehicle category, Tim Howes had pulled out a lead over Clint Gibson and Sandra Yonk in Class A, whilst Nico Durant was just ahead of Peter Walter and Dean Bradbury after 3 rounds of racing. But those are just the cold, hard facts. Here's a more detailed look at the players, as well as their plans for the weekend in Parys. Toyota Gazoo Racing SA's Henk Latergan seemed set for a 2nd consecutive championship, and the youngster knew what he had to do.
We're going to have to focus and keep it very clean for the prologue.
But teammate Janiel de Villiers had never been one to give up, even if it meant he had to win both races to keep the chase alive.
Yeah, I mean, then quite simple. We've got to win both, and then, what happens, happens. So we'll try our best today.
In Class T, Terence Marsh had dropped just behind the Horn brothers in the title chase, but with just 2 points separating them, the red line Nissan driver was still in with a shout.
Yeah, so everything's come down to the end now. It's obviously exciting times, but it's a double round. So there's we've got to be fast. We've also got to be clever. So it's going to be really interesting.
As for Johan Horn, the Malalan Toyota Hilux driver was somewhat surprised to find himself leading the championship.
No, I think we're actually surprised to be leading Class T with all our issues this year. So well, let's see what happens today.
The special vehicle category saw Tim Howes open up a slight gap to his nearest rival. The Zarco Magnum driver looked on course to win his first title. At the same time, Nico Durant had a slender lead in Class G, but had also shown consistent form during 2020 to go into the penultimate round with the championship firmly in his sights. So those are the players as well as the points. Next order of business was to go racing in Parys. But before we can do that, here's the Ford Castrol Cross Country team's team principal, Neil Woolridge, with some insight into the race itself.
Yeah, look, we're very proud to have a Ford event. It's been a while since we had a Ford event, so we're very, very proud to call this the Ford 400 race. So, it's exciting times.
Oh, and one interesting little tidbit as well. SACCS President Archie Rutherford entered the race with his younger son Justin, a pairing with possibly the largest age gap in the sport. Not only that, but Rutherford Sr., who has many years of experience in the sport, would tackle the Ford Parys 400 from behind the wheel of a Class G, side by side, for the first time.
But I've managed to put the seat as far back as I can, as low down as I can, and so I'll get in. I don't know how I'm going to get out, but I'll get in.
The Ford Parys 400 was the first of 2 races on the weekend of the 23rd and 24th of October. And since the organisers had to fit 2 events into just 2 days, the Pirelli qualifying race was truncated to just 14 kilometres. This short, sharp sprint was used to determine the starting positions for the main race, which followed shortly after the qualifier. The qualifying turned out to be a tough one for the first car into the loop, which was TGRSA's Variawa and Murphy. The pair managed only 7th fastest, losing 32 seconds to the leaders after struggling to find the route in places. Ahead of them, the monstrous Century CR6 of Brian Baragwanath and Tay Perry went 8 seconds faster to claim 6, whilst they had the hard-charging Ford Rangers of the two Woolridge brothers romping into 4th and 5th place. Lance Woolridge, with Alvin Vonk beside him, posting exactly the same time as brother Gareth alongside Boyd Dreyer. The Ford Castrol cross-country team setting times of 9 minutes 28 seconds in the process. The first step of the qualifying podium for the production cars belonged to Toyota Gazoo Racing SA's Chanel de Villiers, now racing with Alex Harrow from Spain, who managed to make the trip to SA despite the COVID pandemic. The pair set a time of 9 minutes 24 seconds, bettering the Fords by 4 seconds. The two fastest crews on the day were Chris Visser and Donnie Stassen in the Total Exilium Toyota Hilux, who set the exact same time as TGR-SA's Henk Ladergan and Brett Cummings, some 4 seconds ahead of de Villiers. Behind the Class FIA cars came Johan and Werner Horn in the Malalan Toyota Hilux as the first of the Class T cars home. They were followed by a gaggle of Fords, with Jacques Van Tondre and Sammy Redlinghuis setting the second fastest time, 23 seconds behind the Malalan Toyota crew. They pipped Force Prinsloo and Andre Vermeulen by a single second, who in turn led Malcolm and Frans Koch into third of the Fords by 2 seconds. A close run affair all round. The gap was much bigger in the special vehicle category, where Lance Trethui and Adrian Roots posted a time of 9 minutes 31 seconds to take pole, 54 seconds ahead of Tim Howes and Gary Campbell in a second place. Class stalwarts Sandra and Jaco Jonk followed some 27 seconds later to round out a Class A qualifying podium. Class G saw Hanno Bierman and Peter de Beer set the early pace as they posted a time of 10 minutes and 3 seconds, well clear of Christo Rose and Arno Olivier, who in turn took second place, 36 seconds back. The De Beers, Jean and Michael, went third fastest, joining us from the regional categories, and posted a time 14 seconds off second place. Let's take a quick look at the qualifying results in each category. Ladergan and Cummings tied with Visser and Stassen for the fastest time, with de Villiers and Harrow making up an all-Toyota top 3. The first Class T home was that of the Horn brothers, with Van Tonder and Redlinghuis in second and Prinsloo and Vermeulen taking third. Trethui and Roots were the fastest of the open wheelers, with Howes and Campbell in second and the Yonks taking a 3 spot. And finally, Class G saw Bierman and De Beer at the top of the charts, with Rose and Olivier in second and the De Beers taking third. With the dust settling over the Pirelli qualifying race, it was time for some rest and repairs in the DSP before tackling the main event later that same morning. In between, the SACCS continued its tradition of giving back to the communities in the areas where the races take place, with the handover of school shoes to some needy recipients. But it wasn't long before it was time to go racing once again. The entire field of competitors already kicked off a few kilometers during the morning's short but action-packed qualifying race, and they were all getting ready to line up for the 10:30 start of the race proper. The results of the Pirelli qualifying race is used to determine the start order of the race, and as winners of that, the honour of opening up the road once again fell on the shoulders of champions Henk Ladergan and Brett Cummings in the Toyota Gazoo Racing SA Hilux. In fact, the Total Exilium Hilux of former champion Chris Visser and Donnie Stassen set the exact same time, but were happy to start the race 2 minutes later, as it would mean that they had one set of tracks to follow. Our drone giving us great aerial footage of what used to be known as the spectator section. Normally this would be filled with cheering fans. Right now, we were in the sky just enjoying the show that Visser and Stassen were putting on. Next up, the second factory Hilux in the hands of Janelle de Villiers, now with Spanish co-driver Alex Harrow back in the navigating seat. You'll have to wait a touch to see how that battle ended as we first cast our attention to the guys and girls competing in the special vehicle category of cross-country racing. This category traditionally dishes up a huge spectacle and consists of 3 different classes. Class A, with its huge 7-litre V8 power plants, the somewhat smaller engine cars in Class P, and the string of cars that has provided a more affordable entry into the exciting world of cross-country racing, the so-called side-by-sides or G-class of the special vehicle category that seems to be growing on each event. Nico Durant and Rickers Hutting found themselves near the back end of the field and not where they needed to be to fight for the title. SACCF chief Archie Rutherford also missed out on an opportunity to impress his youngest son Justin when they failed to reach the finish of loop number 1. The list of side-by-side Class G vehicles who did reach the Parys airfield for a well-earned rest halfway through the race included Theo Erasmus and Kearney Besadenhout. Defending champions Werner and Leon Mostert were plagued by an electrical issue in their Elf Renault Duster Can-Am Maverick for the 3rd time in as many races, and they even lost a wheel along the way. They've managed to reach the DSP in 5th position, around 10 minutes behind circuit racer turned off-road racer Simon Murray, with the experienced Akim Bergman reading the notes in the Total Exilium Can-Am, claiming 4th at this crucial part of the race. It was still too early to draw any conclusions though. But the provisional podium at the halfway mark of the Ford Parys 400 looked like this. In 3rd, Christo Rose and Arno Olivier, their targets, Dean Bradbury and Dirvod Els, who were a mere 23 seconds up the road and well within striking distance. But they all would have their work cut out if they had any aspirations of reeling in the leaders. Hanno Bierman and Peter de Beer seemed well in control and reached the halfway mark with a comfortable margin of nearly 8 minutes.
Yeah, look, it was a tough day also. The straights aren't doing these side-by-sides quite well. But great job to the guys that marked the road.
Trace Price-Moore and Sean Braithwaite were behind the wheel of the only Class P car in the special vehicle field and found themselves right in the middle of a gaggle of Class G cars. Up ahead, lady driver Sandra Yonk and husband Jaco were doing a great job of keeping all the horses underneath the bonnet of the Total Agri Porter in line and in a current 3rd place in Class A, around 3 minutes behind champions-elect Tim Howes and Gary Campbell. Howes knew that a solid points finish on the day would earn him the title, which meant that out in front, the big dog and outgoing champion, Lance Trethewey and Adrian Roots in the passenger seat, had it all their own way as they cruised to a massive 6-minute lead at the halfway point. And these were the standings at the halfway marker of the Ford Parys 400 for the guys and girls in the special vehicle category, which confirms Trethewey's dominance at the top ahead of Howes and Yonk. Price-Moore had Class P all to himself, whilst Hanno Bierman led a field of highly competitive Class G side-by-sides ahead of Dean Bradbury and Christo Rose. Let's now get back to the furious battle that was raging in the production car category, consisting of Class FIA and T vehicles. There were problems for a number of protagonists, such as the usually quick Gary Berthold and Jeff Minott, who finished way down the order due to some technical difficulties. Championship hopefuls Terence Marsh and Lesego Zulu reached the halfway mark 5th in class, with some work to do, as the next car was some 4 minutes up the road. That car was the NWM Ford Ranger of Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlingace, who made a welcome return to the sport after being absent for the most part of 2020. This left the following 3 cars to fight it out for the provisional podium. Winners of the previous race, Malcolm and Franz Koch, in another NWM Ford Ranger, the Malalan Toyota Hilux of the Horn brothers from, you guessed it, Malalan, and another NWM Ford Ranger occupied by Burley Borussians, Horst Prinsloo and Andre Vermeulen. It was a closely fought affair, with Koch having to settle for 3rd at this stage. The Malalan Toyota, on the other hand, would have been in a better position, was it not for some serious issues.
Yeah, we lost 5th and 6th gear halfway in the loop, so yeah. Try just to finish today and just take it out tonight and try to fix it.
So it was the likeable Prinsloo who emerged with the Class T lead after the first of the 2 racing loops that would make up the Ford Parys 400. And then we finally get to talk about the Class FIA cars, the same specification cars that take part in each year's Dakar Rally, the most grueling event on the planet. And even though these are tough times, it's good to see the class grow with new talent like Philip Buerta and Roelof Janssen van Vuren joining the cross-country family. Up ahead, the Alf Renault Duster of Johan van Staden and Leander Pienaar just made it into the top 10 and were hot on the heels of Clint Weston and Gerrit Snyman in the King Price Extreme vehicle, who were now in turn hoping to close the gap between themselves and the Toyota Gazoo Racing SA Hilux of Shamir Variawa and Dennis Murphy. The Redline crew of Ernst Roberts and Henry Kerner were doing themselves no harm at all by setting a blistering pace in their Navara, reaching the DSP with the 7th fastest time. But they had some work to do if they had any aspirations of catching up to the next car on the road, the Ford Castrol Racing Ranger of Lance Woolridge and Alvin Vonk. Woolridge had had a tough day of it so far that included a few flat tyres and a broken air conditioner, not really what you wanted in the sweltering heat of Parys. And the last time we checked into the Class FIA standings, it was the CR6 of Brian Baragwanath and Tay Perry, who took the overall lead of the race with just one checkpoint to go. But they wrong-slotted on 1 or 2 turns and gave away a few valuable seconds, enough to drop down from the lead into 5th. Despite also getting lost for a few valuable seconds, the second Ford Castrol Racing Ranger of Gareth Woolridge and Boyd Dreyer reached the halfway mark in a fine 4th position, just 40 seconds from the provisional podium. So who were on the provisional podium at the halfway mark of the Ford Parys 400? As with so many times, it was these 3 crews, but in what order? Well, Chanel de Villiers and Alex Harrow qualified in 3rd, and despite the Dakar legend's best efforts, 3rd was pretty much where he would stay until getting back to the DSP for a rest. The gap to 2nd place wasn't much though, as less than a minute separated their Toyota Gazoo Racing SA Hilux from the Total Exilium version, driven by Chris Visser and Donnie Stassen. Remember, Visser set the exact same time as Henk Ladergan and Brett Cummings in the next Toyota Gazoo Racing SA Hilux in the qualifying, so what followed on Loop 1 was a race of epic proportions. After around 170 kilometers of racing, Ladergan had the edge as he managed to open a slight gap of just 19 seconds. What a great race, and we are only at the halfway marker. The scoreboard revealed that we had a close race on our hands with just 19 seconds separating Ladergan and Visser, with de Villiers in hot pursuit. Prinsloo was leading the Class Ts with just a single second over the Horns of Malaland and the Cox from Freiburg, not too far back either. So that's how it stood, with one more lap of a mere 170 kilometers to go. And this is what the main players had to say. Ladergan had the lead, but knew it was going to be tough from here on out.
And we ended up going down the wrong side of 2 or 3 fences. Went wrong about, in total, I think 4 times. So a bit of a frustrating loop. We lost a lot of time just driving around in circles.
Big Chris Visser was charging hard as always.
I think we're there, but it's just flat out stuff. It's from the one corner to the next corner.
Baragwanath and mini navigator Tay Perry spent some time outside the car for the first time as well.
So that was the first time me and Tay have ever changed a puncture. Quite exciting. So it was okay. Obviously I do the heavy lifting and Tay does all the shooting.
All of that, and we're still only at the halfway mark of the race, as another identical loop of the same distance still remained before we could crown the winners of the Ford Parys 400. True to the spirit of cross-country racing, the Ford Parys 400 was a tough race, with many crews forced to throw in the towel. But as has become the norm, let's count them down and tell you about the trials and tribulations of the ones who did reach the end, especially the ones who ended up spraying the bubbly from the winner's podium. Class G stalwarts and current champions Werner and Leon Mostert very nearly didn't make it to the podium, but the brothers showed their class and drove to yet another podium finish, albeit somewhat off their usual pace. They were, however, happy to collect the points that came along with their 3rd place finish. Ahead of the Mosterts, Christo Rose and Honor Olivier were quite happy to finish the race in a fine 2nd position after avoiding most of the obstacles out there. They were happy with the result, but not nearly as happy as newcomers to the sport, Simon Murray, who was heard saying that cross-country racing is the best thing he has ever done, and he has done quite a bit. Murray has the services of the very experienced Akim Bergman reading the notes from the passenger seat of the Total Exilium Can-Am Maverick, and it clearly paid off as he claimed victory in only his 3rd ever cross-country event. Onto the bigger cars in the special vehicle category, where the remaining 4 V8 monsters were still battling it out for the coveted podium spots. When the dust finally settled and the times were added, it was Sandra and Jaco Jonk who returned to Parys in their Total Agri Porter with the total time of 3 hours and 55 minutes, enough to claim a podium finish in Class A of the special vehicle category. Despite finishing second on this occasion, there was more than enough reason to celebrate at the Tim Howes and Gary Campbell corner of DSP. The hard-working crew reaped the rewards for all their efforts by clinching the 2020 Special Vehicle Championship in the process, and that with 1 round still to go. Someone that knows all about winning Special Vehicle Championships is Lance Trithui and Adrian Roots. It was Trithui's first race back since 2019, and what a way to make a comeback. A dominant start-to-finish victory for the big dog once again.
Yeah, it was hard work today. I mean, it was very, very hot in the car. And Adrian had a hard day in the nav seat today, and it was tricky because it was so hard packed and slippery. So the whole day he spent catching the car, but yeah, it was good. We had fun.
Trithui then won the battle of the Ford Parys 400, but Howes was crowned winner of the overall war, and the Yonks took third on the day. And a great first victory for Simon Murray ahead of Christo Rose and Werner Mostert in the ultra-competitive Class Gs. Let's shift our attention now to the production cars category, and more specifically, the raging battle between the Toyotas of the Horn brothers from Malalan and Gary Berthold, the Nissan of title hopefuls Terence Marsh, and the flock of Fords driven by Van Tonder, Koch and Prinsloo. Van Tonder and Berthold slid out of contention on the day, whilst Marsh still had his eye on the Class T title, but could only manage 4th place come the end of the day. Despite their lack of 5th and 6th gear inside the gearbox of the Malalan Toto Racing Hilux, brothers Johan and Werner accumulated points to come home with 3rd place, and who knew at this stage how valuable those points would turn out to be. This meant then that 2 NWM Ford Rangers were the ones fighting it out for Class T honours towards the end of the race, with one being occupied by father and son Malcolm and Frans Koch, and the other by Vos Prinsloo and Andre Vermeulen. It was a great fight, and one that saw a new winner in the form of Prinsloo, who was absolutely ecstatic after crossing the finish line with a lead of just over half a minute over the similar crew, driven by the Kochs.
Ek dink ons het 'n kans om dalk bietjie op te skuif tweede plek toe. En ja, Malcolm is 'n goeie competitor en hy het self hard gery. Maar ja, dit is ons dag vandag en ons het hom gewen.
All that remained now was to determine the order of Class FIA and the overall winners. Brian Baragwanath looked like an overall race winner early on in the day, and the former Dakar quad bike racer was most certainly one to be feared in the near future. But on this day, he slid down the order due to getting stuck in the mud early on loop number 2 and had to be content with a 9th place finish in Class FIA. 2 more punches also didn't help Lance Woolridge's cause and forced the Ford Castrol Ranger down the order into 8th, just losing out on a better position to the Alfa Renault Duster driven by Johan van Staden, who had his fair share of problems to blame for his 7th position in Class FIA. If and but and would have and could have are some of the words one cannot and should never use in racing. But if Shamir Variawa didn't have 3 punches, he surely could have and would have finished better than his eventual 6th place. 5th place was filled by Clint Weston, who drove well to climb the leaderboard and to just finish 1 minute behind 4th place, Janelle de Villiers. De Villiers, on the other hand, had a blistering second loop of the race and even went into the overall lead of the virtual lead on the standings. But no less than 3 flat tyres put an end to his winning aspirations. And after losing some time on the first of the day's loops, the Ford Castrol Racing Ranger of Gareth Woolridge really put the hammer down on the second loop to climb the leaderboard and claim a well-earned podium finish in Class FIA in what is essentially still their stock Class T racing car. A great drive by the young Italian. And then there were 2, Henk Ladergan and Chris Visser. The Toyota Gazoo Racing SA Hilux versus the Total Exilium one. It was the young and current champion Henk Ladergan who started the second loop with a mere 19-second advantage over the older and former champion Visser. This is the sort of racing that makes you drive on the limit, and it's when you're driving on this limit that things happen. In this case, things did happen. Ladergan got 2 flat tyres and Visser didn't. This gave the well-deserved victory to the big farmer, who finally managed to end the youngsters' winning streak in 2020. And here it is, confirmation of Visser's 1 minute and 36-second victory over Lauderdale, with Woolridge claiming the final podium position. And the name of Prinsloo appears at the top of the Class T scoreboard for the first time, ahead of Malcolm Cock and the Horns from Malalan. It might have been alcohol-free bubbly, but the taste would still have been pretty satisfying for Visser, who claimed the final win of 2020.
Yeah, I must say we had a clean run the whole day, and Donnie kept us unbelievable on the notes, and very glad that we pulled it off. I must say the whole year wasn't on our side, and today, luckily, it was our turn.
So Visser won the battle, but Lauderdale's performance throughout the season and the points, with the second place finish here at Parys, were enough to claim his second consecutive title.
Everything's still settling down. Stressful event and stressful last loop. So the nerves are still settling from that. But we didn't have the perfect race, but luckily we had a really good season to wrap up the championship. So really happy about that.
As for Ford, they walked away with the Manufacturers Award, thanks in large part to Prinsloo's win in Class T. Next up, the Toyota Gazoo Racing Vol 400, which took place the next day at the same place on pretty much the same route. So join us next week for the conclusion of the 2020 South African Cross Country Series. This action from the Ford Parys 400 was proudly brought to you by the South African Cross Country Series in association with Toyota Gazoo Racing, Ford, Total Quartz and Pirelli.